IVM.
We would like to thank HDFC Life Insurance for supporting this show. HDFC Life Insurance has created an online video series called Behind the Journey with some of the most interesting people from the creative and entertainment industry. It explores the stories that are behind the glitz and glamour of the spotlight and screaming fans. Let's listen to a snippet from the episode featuring singer Jasleen Royale.
Music थोड़ी expensive hobby होती है, and for middle class parents to understand that and support you can be a little difficult. So I went to a music teacher and he said like, why don't you teach my batch? And I started taking his batches. So the goal was like to earn around 40,000 क्योंकि मुझे एक keyboard लेना था अपने लिए. I saved money every penny I made and I got that keyboard.
Saving money is a key component to take care of your dreams and your finances. You can watch all episodes of Behind the Journey on HDFC Life Insurance YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/HDFC Life. Take control of your personal goals with HDFC Life Insurance's financial solutions. Plan now with HDFC Life Insurance.
Terms and conditions apply. HDFC Life Insurance Company Limited, IRDAI registration number 101.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. Something very interesting has been happening in the world of tech, as it usually tends to be. Most recently, what's happened is that a doctored video of US House Majority Leader Nancy Pelosi has been doing the rounds. We won't get into the details here, but the essence of it is that it seems to show her ripping up the President Trump's State of the Union speech while he's talking about war heroes. And while it's obviously fake, both Facebook and Twitter, which have recently come out with policies explicitly tailored to tackle this sort of fake news, are saying that it doesn't violate their policies. So this, of course, got me thinking more broadly about how are these policies defining fake news? Why is it that current mechanisms of fighting them don't seem to be working? And what really is the prognosis for the world going forward on this front? So joining me today are Pratik Wagre and Rohan Seth, who have written extensively about this. Pratik has written about how to fight misinformation and disinformation, and Rohan has written about the fact-checking ecosystem. So let's first try to get to the bottom of this issue here, right? So I'm just opening the floor to the both of you. The way that I see it is, if such a blatantly fake video that is evidently meant to tarnish the reputation of a major political leader does not violate this policy against fake news, then how much else can trickle through the cracks, as it were?
So let me take that one. Before we go into that, I want to make the distinction between terms like fake news, misinformation, disinformation, etc. Right?
Okay.
So the term fake news itself, popularized by a certain world leader, right, is it lacks nuance and it's often misleading itself because it's not always stuff that's fake that's shared. Sometimes you have real stuff just shared out of context. Right. So I think it's important for us to start distinguishing fake news with the various with actual types of information disorder that we see, because that just helps us think about these things a little more clearly. Okay. Right. So if you look at it, you think there's two main components. One is misinformation, which is basically just unintentional mistakes, inaccurate data, etc. That's put out there. At the other end of the spectrum is malinformation, which is actual content, or generally not false content, but shared with an intention to do harm, right? So you typical example we see very often in India, where you have a 2-year-old video of something else that is now being shared with a completely different context with an actual intention to harm. Yeah. Right. And the intersection of these two, sort of disinformation, right, which is deliberately manipulated video or content with an intent to cause harm, right? So that basically is the information disorder ecosystem. So you have misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation.
Okay, so let me just see if I understand this correctly. So we're imagining a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
One circle is misinformation. Misinformation is stuff that might not necessarily be wrong deliberately. Right?
Okay.
Another circle is malinformation, which is information that might actually be doctored or just generally correct information that's presented out of context with a malicious intent. Right. And at their intersection is what you're calling disinformation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this video, right, technically would fall under, it's sort of in the malinformation kind of era, right, in the area, because she did tear up the speech. They're just showing it out of context in the sense that she's tearing it up while he's speaking. Right. Now, the interesting thing is that both Facebook and Twitter have recently announced updates to their policies. Facebook has said that it's going to basically ban any sort of synthetic media, deepfakes, for instance. So this is technically not a deepfake. Twitter's policy is a little broader.
Hang on, let me just stop you right there. So let me try to fit this again into this framework that we're using, right? So a deepfake would technically count as malinformation?
No, deepfake is disinformation.
Disinformation.
Pure disinformation, because it's synthetic. It's completely generally synthetic. Yeah.
Okay.
So this falls outside of Facebook's synthetic media policy. Twitter's policy is broader in the sense that they're looking at any sort of synthetic or manipulated media which is heavily edited.
Heavily edited as defined by
overdubbed. So they've given a couple of scenarios. So overdubbed audios, right? They have reference changing context, but that's in the context of text. If you've over manipulated the clip, you sped up certain parts, you slowed down certain parts. If you recall the instance where a certain journalist's hand motion was sped up in a White House press conference to make it look like he was being physical with a White House staffer, right? So those sort of things would probably be covered. And so this policy goes into effect on March 5th. At this point, Twitter don't think has taken down the video. They're going to mark synthetic or manipulated media in your timeline. So instead of seeing the video as it is, you'll see an obfuscated thumbnail there.
So you're telling me that Twitter and Facebook actually have ways of detecting when media is synthetic.
So generally to the naked eye, let's say a deepfake video just looks like another video, right?
Yeah.
You can't tell if Nancy Pelosi is actually... I know that's not a deepfake, but if that was a deepfake, you can't tell whether or not it's real, right? But to the computer, it is very evident that certain aspects have been manipulated. So computers look at manipulated videos a different way. So it is easier for Facebook and Twitter's algorithms, let's say, to detect deepfakes and obfuscate them.
Okay.
But then again, it's not 100% accurate. And there are things that are sometimes fairly obvious to the naked eye, but is not that obvious to an algorithm, right? For if you have blatantly false text, it's not that easy, text outside the context of the video that's there. It may not be that easy for a computer to algorithmically detect, but you're looking at your timeline, you have a video of Obama and you have a caption that says Trump, it's wrong, right? It's not necessarily that easy for something to be algorithmically detected. So with Twitter's policy, the thing is that they're going to mark synthetic media. They're going to indicate that this has possibly been fact-checked. So you'll actually see a link there which says, okay, so-and-so has been fact-checked by XYZ organization. Right? So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because there are issues here, right? So in theory, their policy seems very good. But in terms of implementation, I think that's where the challenges lie.
So let's get into that a little bit. So let me just move to you first, Rohan. You've talked about how the fact-checking ecosystem doesn't really achieve the outcomes it's supposed to. So how do you see this new policy of getting independent fact-checkers to give you basically a little badge on various kinds of content? How do you see it playing out?
Sure. So my argument is not so much about the fact-checking ecosystem as about the nature of fact-checking itself. I do think that the steps that Twitter in particular is taking, I don't see Facebook taking these steps anytime soon. When Twitter goes ahead and says that I'm going to fact check certain posts, and they're going to build up fact checking alliances with different organizations that do similar, do engage in this. My argument is that it is not fun being fact checked. And that's why it doesn't necessarily work. I think it's a good step. I think it's not enough as well. Because, and I've tested this multiple times over the past weeks while I was writing this article for my column in the Deccan Chronicle.
Very subtle plug from Rohan there.
So I'm not sure if you remember, but we, at least in the circles that WhatsApp groups that I'm in, a lot of people kept sharing this photo of the JNU students union leader at the time. I forget his name. And the photo was of Indira Gandhi standing in front of JNU. And the caption was that, well, during the time of emergency, JNU's leader said something about Indira Gandhi. And Indira Gandhi came to JNU, made him apologize, and then made him resign from his post. At first, when I read it, I thought, sure, it makes sense.
Seems like something Indira Gandhi would do, huh?
Yeah, seems like an Indira Gandhi approach. I have no idea what her personality is like, so I'm pretty gullible that way. But part of me just wanted to check if that is actually the truth. At first glance, I did accept it to be a fact. I think 3-4 days after I checked it, and obviously it wasn't true. The guy who Indira Gandhi was supposed to have made resign is still alive today, and he has a Twitter, and he says that this did not happen. Times of India fact checked this whole thing, and so what I did was I sent a debunking link to the person who had sent me this, and to my surprise or lack thereof, they did not write back to me. At least not on that topic. And similar things have been. I've been trying similar things recently, and the core tenet of my argument is that when someone fact checks you, right, it ends up sort of saying that, sure, I may have been wrong here, but my worldview is still valid. And that's why I think fact-checking fails. Because if it didn't, you would have media outlets changing thoughts, beliefs, views every day, right? New facts emerge every day. TV channels, news channels do cover them, but they don't change your beliefs. And this is where I read a book called The Network Public by Amber Sinha from CIS. I think I've plugged this one in before. But he talks about this and explains this whole thing in 2 theories. He says that there are theories of communication. The first one is, when we typically think of misinformation, we think of it as a needle, as a pollutant. Like, we are a passive audience, we see something that's misinformation, we spread it. That's literally how everyone I know imagines misinformation, as did I for the longest time. But then he says there have been multiple studies that say that this is not how misinformation travels. Misinformation does not impact a passive audience, it actually engages an active audience. So the difference here is that people can look at the same facts and draw out their own perceptions from it. And people are active consumers of information. So their context matters, their perception matters. And that's where I think fact-checking fails, because you've had a lot of fact-checking happen, and it might not always be in your Facebook feed, but if you just Google whatever latest piece of misinformation that you might have received, like I did with the Indira Gandhi one, the facts are out there. So my main critique is that fact-checking, it's a good step, it's not enough. And Google's also invested $1 million, which I know doesn't sound like a huge figure. It's really not.
It's peanuts for Google.
It is peanuts for Google, but to set up a fact-checking mission, I think it's a good start. My only critique here is that maybe we need to go beyond this.
There's actually research from the Poynter Institute which talks about how the actual manipulated information as compared to the fact check, they did a study and they compared how much more engagement it got. So I think the fact checks got maybe a very tiny fraction of the engagement that the actual disinformation got.
And I have a personal anecdote to share on this front, actually. So yesterday, something was going viral in the history bubble of Twitter where I usually live, about this restoration of this huge temple in Orissa, the Konark Sun Temple.
That's historic.
Yes. The original tweet that was going viral was a picture of these beautiful erotic sculptures that are on the walls of the temple, saying that this is how it used to look, and this is the ASI restoration, with all the sculptures gone and just replaced by plain blocks of sandstone. Now, the handle that shared it was a pretty rabid Hindutva handle, and its whole description of this problem was that we have completed the work of the evil invaders who want to destroy this temple. But because it's something that I personally feel so strongly about, the fact that the ASI constantly cocks up restorations like this, I still quote tweeted it and said, and had this huge kind of outburst, and that got like a crazy amount of engagement. It got like 4 or 5 retweets and a bunch of likes within a few seconds. All right. And then again, like within a few minutes from then, somebody fact-checked me and pointed out that no, these are actually two different parts of the temple. And it's fairly obvious that this handle shared it deliberately as malinformation to try and discredit the Orissa government. The second I realized that, I deleted it and I posted a confirmation on my TL. But that got barely any engagement. And I think that this really highlights what you were saying, in the sense that the reason why people engage with misinformation is because it kind of confirms a certain kind of worldview. It signals a particular kind of affiliation. Now, how do you guys think that this can be solved? It's clearly, at the risk of sounding probably a little heretical, I don't think the issue is really the fact that fake news isn't being fact-checked, but the fact that fake news is proliferating because market incentives are in favor of misinformation and that kind of thing. So what do you think the way forward is given this?
I mean, if we knew the answer to this and could apply for a job posting at Twitter.
So why don't you tell me, for example, I believe that Facebook has come up with this whole oversight board and so on and so forth. How is that supposed to be operating? How do you see it unfolding?
Yeah, so the oversight board, as its charter is right now, is fairly narrow. So it's only going to look into cases of a content takedown, right? So which is where you've posted something, it's been taken down, you've appealed to Facebook or Instagram or whoever, and they've reviewed and they've still said, no, we believe it should stay down. That's when you can go to the oversight board, which they call their Supreme Court for content moderation, or if Facebook specifically refers a tricky case or a special case to them. So it's not going, in its present form, it's not going to do anything to these situations where content that should not be staying up or should be addressed is already is staying up. Right? So if you're in a situation where something about you has been put up, you can, yes, as the current policy stands, you can submit a takedown request. And if Facebook still rules that, no, we believe this content stays up, as things stand, you can't take that case any further. They might expand the board's charter, but there is no commitment in terms of a timeline on when they might do that. The other interesting aspect that stood out for me was today you're limited. You can only do this if you have a Facebook or an Instagram account. Which again, in its current form may make sense, because for your content to have been taken down, you have to have posted something, which means you have an account, which is fair. But if they need to expand that requirement, I think going forward, because tomorrow, when the board charter is expanded, I'm not on any of those platforms, but let's assume I'm important enough that someone posts something about me, I may not have a way to actually to appeal for that, right?
That's ridiculous.
And what's interesting was, I went through the transcripts of the call that they announced this in, and it was fairly telling, because someone specifically asked this question that, hey, why do I need to have an account? And the response to that was that, look, ultimately, I'm paraphrasing a little, right? But the view the sense that I got was that the oversight board is ultimately, for Facebook's users, right? For Facebook, Instagram users, and they're going to use whatever insight they gather from it to improve their product, right? So it's still looking at it as a fairly internal product ecosystem kind of thing, not in terms of a larger responsibility to the information discourse. That's the sense I got, right? Now, if you read that transcript, you might have a different takeaway from it, but that's the takeaway that I had, that in its current form, they seem to be looking at it at a fairly narrow lens. And someone pointed this out. I think it was Evelyn Duke in a post for Lawfare, where she said they are going surprisingly slow for a company whose motto used to be move fast and break things.
Interesting take.
I have a minor rant to go on here, because firstly, I don't agree with the term users on Facebook. I think raw material is a better term. But that aside, Shoshana Zuboff says a lot about this in her book, Surveillance Capitalism. But that aside, just look at the difference in approach Facebook and Twitter are taking. Facebook's objectively a much larger company, right? The oversight board decisions are not binding to Facebook. So it will make a recommendation that this content should be taken down, and Facebook can choose to ignore that. And Pratik mentioned the Lawfare blog. Zoe Darme, who's heading the Facebook oversight board, was asked this question: why are these decisions by the oversight board not binding? So she said that, well, because they can end up harming Facebook's interests. And she gives an extreme example.
Nice to see them being so honest about it.
I mean, her example, and I thought was valid, but it was an extreme end of the spectrum. She said that, what if the oversight board ends up saying that, well, it is Facebook's newsfeed that is the problem, so shut down the newsfeed.
Shut down the bloody newsfeed. Have some social responsibility.
My point is, sure, that is Facebook's money minting machine, whatnot. Fine, don't agree to that. But at the same time, making none of the decisions of the oversight board binding?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's
might as well not have one.
It's a great example of the endowment effect in action, right? I mean, if you look at the way the newspapers were regulated in like the 19th, 20th century, they were regulated from the very outset. There were very clear standards. There were industry standards, industry compliance bodies. Self-regulation was implemented, and more importantly, it genuinely seemed like there was a broader responsibility towards society. Whereas Facebook and like even Google, for example, whose motto was literally "Don't be evil" for the longest time, are both guilty of absolute. I mean, I don't want to mince words about this, but absolute bullshit when it comes to this front. They are responsible for really nurturing this ecosystem of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, while pretending to be doing something, establishing this kind of oversight board. They are still not. They're openly admitting, as you pointed out, that it's they don't want to be harming their own interests.
It makes for good optics, right?
My point is that the oversight board's not stupid. Like, they're not going to go ahead and say, "Oh, shut down Facebook's newsfeed." I mean, I assume they will know better, because whoever's going to be on the oversight board are going to be highly qualified individuals who possibly worked for Facebook before and know how important this is. The newsfeed, let's say, is to Facebook. My point is that Facebook in particular is not doing, like, let's say Twitter goes ahead with this whole policy on March 5th, it comes into effect. There's a long-standing debate here where how liable is a platform for the content that is posted on it. At least Twitter is making positive steps to have more liability in this area, to say that we will have a team of fact checkers, we'll check for doctored video. An oversight board whose decisions are not binding is making an attempt for the sake of making an attempt.
Yeah. And they're not even pretending to be doing anything about it.
And all credit to Zoe Dame for going ahead and doing this, but I think even she must realize that at least there should be some credit to this board before it is even constituted, to say that, well, maybe they can have exemptions that this is what the board can't reach for. So the board can't reach for doctoring Facebook's newsfeed or whatever. But they should have some power at least to bind fake news, content, misinformation, all of this. They should have at least some power that binds Facebook to follow their directive.
I think the crucial point to note here is how basically the interests of Facebook shareholders line up with the interests of broader entrenched actors in the political economy, right? I think an awful lot of governments across the world, an awful lot of political parties see this mechanism as being in their interest. So there isn't really any sort of political will to bring Facebook into line. At the same time, Facebook has plenty of support from its shareholders who see this business model as being extremely lucrative. And when you have so many powerful people who are convinced that this is in their best interests, and you essentially have, as you said, raw material that is addicted to Facebook and unable to go elsewhere because of the way that Facebook operates, its network effects and so on and so forth, it's difficult to see a route out of this mess. And
it's not just shareholders, right? Because it's important, because the end goal is more engagement, right? So if I remember, I think for the 2016 election manipulation thing that happened in the US, not all of them were directly tied to Russian propaganda, right? Some of them were just teenagers, I think, in Ukraine running
Romania,
operations.
I think, just want to make some money, and I get that.
They were just making money, right?
I mean, look at Op India, great example, right? A bunch of jobless people make money off misinformation on Facebook. I mean,
a lot of shots being fired in this podcast.
So there is an incentive for people to keep oversharing information without necessarily worrying about the veracity, to the extent that it probably even suits them. As long as it's something that's going to go viral, no one really cares about whether it's true or not.
Speaking of such things, I think I should plug my older op-ed here once again. You're talking about the political will to keep a check on Facebook, and I think there has been some in the US. It's called the Honest Ads Act, and it was one of those few ads I think that had bipartisan support. Imagine how rare that is in today's American discourse. And it had Facebook support as well. And
I'm automatically cynical about it.
Now. But this is exactly where it goes. So the moment Facebook supported it, support for the Honest Ads Act just died.
Well, and here's the thing, right? Honest Ads Act aside, even despite that, you've had cases where they got themselves into a mess with the whole we will not fact check political ads.
Yeah.
This thing. So
the really famous...
it's always one step forward, 1.5 steps back, or 2 steps back.
I remember the interview with Mark Zuckerberg and I think it was Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, right? Where she asked him, if I put out an ad saying that, I don't know, some big-time Republican senator is in favor of my Green New Deal, will you remove it? And he said no. And he was literally sweating marbles. Like you could see it on the guy's face.
But she has a very valid point.
Exactly.
And I think there has to be at least one point in time in the near future where Facebook addresses this.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg, if you're listening, as you can see, 3 big fans of yours here who have your best interests at heart. So listen to us. And on that note, thank you guys so much for joining me, and thank you, the rest of you, except for Mark Zuckerberg, for listening to All Things Policy.
Okay then.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. We'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. Thank you, HDFC Life, for coming on board. Also, would like to thank Storytel for continuing the long time advertising that they've been doing with us. And if you have a brand and you'd like to advertise with us, please send us an email. We'd love to talk to you. And let me tell you a couple of things that you should check out this week. On States of Anarchy, Humsini talks about the Brazil-India relationship. On Agla Station Adulthood, Ayushi and Ritasha talk about pleasure, sex, and much more. On a nostalgia-laden episode of the Geek Fruit podcast, Tejas and Dinkar go back to the franchise with the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies and talk about how they hold up today, 12 years after the last movie came out. On our Kannada podcast, Thalle Harate, scholar Avinash Amble combines neuroscience, mathematical logic, and the cutting edge of computer science to explain the history of machine vision to Pawan and Surya. On Tapri Tales, Madhuri weaves the tale around a conversation between 3 friends. Thanks and keep listening.
Welcome to Peak Planet, a new podcast where we delve into the fallouts of the growth path that we and indeed much of the world has chosen. Sustainable growth is the buzzword. Until we nail that down, we need to ensure that we keep our population healthy and also have the resources for our increasingly urban lifestyles. I'm Karthik Ganesan, a researcher at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, a Delhi-based policy research institute where for almost a decade we've been trying to explain and change the use, reuse and misuse of our resources. In the first season of Peak Planet, we take up air pollution, public enemy number 1 and an invisible one at that. Increasingly, the most important risk factor for adverse health outcomes, air pollution has become the most unwanted byproduct of our aggressively growing economy. Over 4 episodes, we find out how prepared our systems are to deal with this crisis. You can catch the entire first season of Peak Planet out now on the IVM Podcasts app or website, or wherever you get your podcast from.